Hello, everybody. It is the top of the hour, so we are going to dive in. Good morning for some of you, good afternoon, and gosh, even for some of you, good evening. Welcome to our webinar this month called Let's Cook, Hands-on Training Design Using Endurance Learning Training Activity Cookbook. My name's Erin Clark. I'm from Endurance Learning, and I'll be your producer today. When I'm not producing webinars, which is honestly most of the time, I'm working to support the instructional design needs of our clients here at Endurance Learning. On your screen here is a QR code for Endurance Learning's LinkedIn page, and we'd love to have you follow us. And for those of you who have been here before, you'll know that you'll want to stick around to the end of the webinar because we have two drawings today. We're going to do two giveaways. The first will be a drawing for one of Brian Washburn's books, and you'll have a choice between instructional design on a shoestring, which focuses more on the tactics of instructional design, or on What's Your Formula, which focuses on the bigger picture training and program strategy. We'll also have a drawing for one of our e-learning courses, and we'll talk about that more at the end of today's webinar. I have one more announcement before I hand it over to Brian and we jump in today, and that is for our webinar next month. We really hope you'll join us in March for our webinar called How to Engage Challenging Training Participants. I know those of us who have led training, whether it's instructor led or virtual instructor led or any kind of facilitation, you've run into those challenging training participants, and we want to talk about how do we engage them. So that webinar will be Thursday, March 12th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern, and it'll be back to our normal hour-long format. So with that, let me introduce you to today's presenter. Endurance Learning's co-founder, Brian Washburn, has been in the world of training and instructional design for about 20 years. Most of his career was spent leading training teams in the nonprofit sector before he launched Endurance Learning in 2015. He's published two full-length books and countless articles on the topic of instructional design and training strategy. So now I get to hand it over to Brian to lead us through this webinar.
Thank you, Aaron. This is a supersized webinar. We have 75 minutes of pure joy that's going to follow here. So, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As Aaron mentioned, my name is Brian Washburn, and I'm kind of curious who else is here. So, in the chat, if you could share your name, your hometown, and one other question that I have for you, which really frames today's webinar, is how do you know if someone in your training session gets it? Like, how do you know that they're following along, they're picking up what you're laying down? So, I'd love to see some of your thoughts in the chat, and also just to kind of know who's joining us and where you're joining from. So, as you do that, please go ahead and light up the chat with your thoughts, and I'm gonna just kind of share an overview of what to expect during today's webinar. So keep those answers coming in. I can already see people saying, "You see the light bulb go off," they're asking good follow-up questions. So please keep those coming in. And as you do that. During today, here are some things that you can expect. The first thing, as I mentioned, this is a supersized webinar. The reason that we wanted to leave 75 minutes for today's session, and we can also see that our attendance is a little bit lower than typical because during today's session, there's going to be a challenge and we're going to have you working together in groups. So this is going to be a very hands-on session today. So we're going to give you a challenge. I'm going to talk a little bit about, or even give you a model presentation of what it could look like to address that challenge. And then for folks that are new to today's webinar, or maybe new to endurance learning and some of the things we've been doing, we're going to introduce the four-step training design model that we use. For folks that have been on these webinars in the past, it may be a reintroduction or a reminder of what that is. But we just want to make sure that the level is set so that people understand what it is we're going to ask you to do when you get into a small group, a breakout session, and you are going to be designing a 60-minute lesson plan. And we're going to ask you to do that with a very specific formula in mind. And then if I think that we're gonna have some time at the end where you're gonna actually gonna have a chance to see another group's lesson plan and give them some feedback based on kind of a checklist that I've prepared for you. So that is what you have to look forward to. I'm just kind of taking a look at some of the answers in chat here in terms of that question. How do you know that your learners are getting it when they create something? If they're engaged, asking follow-up or clarifying questions. So you can see engagement on their faces. And I love all of these responses. One of the things we're going to talk about here is this four-step training design model is an opportunity to give you structure for a lesson plan. And if you follow this model, you should always be able to see beyond just kind of a feeling, beyond just kind of hoping that what you're seeing in their eyes is aha, as opposed to, ooh, I have a really good idea for dinner tonight, right? We're gonna give you some specific thoughts and ideas and maybe even activities that you can use to see if your learners are getting what it is that you need them to pick up as they get into their training sessions. As we go throughout today, there's going to be a few different handouts we're going to have you working on. And so I just want to make sure that you have access to them as we get started so that as we get into the activities, you're not trying to download something and figure out where it is. And so the first thing that you're going to be using, this is actually a Google Doc. This is going to be a shared document that you're going to be working in today. And I'll be referring to this throughout the course of today's webinar. And in the chat, my colleague Rachel will put a link to this document. Another thing that's going to be helpful to you, again, if you have not been on one of Endurance Learning's webinars, is our Endurance Learning's Training Activity Cookbook. And this cookbook has 86 different activities that you can use in order to make your training a little bit more engaging, and so that you don't have to sit there and just stare at the computer and try to think what activity I'm going to use. So this cookbook could be really helpful. Certainly today you can use it during some of the breakout discussions you're going to have when you're creating a lesson plan, and also use it well beyond this particular webinar. And then finally, the third thing that you're going to be using or that we're going to distribute so that we'll refer to throughout the course of today's webinar is just a definition of this four-step training design model. And we'll get into that as we get going here. But today's lesson plan, I'm sorry, today's webinar is titled Let's Cook. And we follow that theme of the cookbook to kind of say, basically we're gonna get active in the training kitchen and put together a lesson plan. And the way we're going to do this is I'm going to give you a situation. And then we'll kind of walk through putting together the lesson. So, in order to figure out what it is that we're going to cook up, let's talk about the situation. And as you can see in that Google Doc, that kind of lays out the situation there. So basically, we've been engaged, all of us, everybody here, all 66 participants, as well as myself. We've been engaged by a company that basically needs us to create a 60-minute training session. Specific, it's not just any training session, it's specific to an issue that they've been having. So they want to help their 21 managers better organize team meetings. And in order to help us start to put something together, they've sent us some data. And they've also sent us a meeting agenda template. It looks like this. And the final thing, because the group that has engaged us is really organized with kind of their need. They figured that training is really going to be an element that helps to solve this problem. They've also shared with us some thoughts on what the training could look like. Now, before we start to create something, I'm going to share with you their thoughts on what this training could look like. So just be ready to kind of go through this lesson as a participant. And then at the end of of this kind of sample training, I'm going to ask you to rate it. I'm going to put up a poll. I'm going to ask you to rate a few different things here. So let's get started. You have, like I said, you have some information in that shared Google Doc on that first page that lays out the situation. It talks about some of the data points and gives you an idea of what this meeting agenda template should look like. What's not in that Google Doc is their thoughts on what the training could look like. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this model, this sample presentation of what this could look like. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So we need to put together, or we need all of the managers at the company to start to use and adopt a new team meeting agenda. So this is the new team meeting agenda training. And the reason for this is we've gotten some data from our annual employee survey that we need to address. And so let me share a few data points with you. The first is when we did our annual company survey, annual employee survey, we had a few different data, a few different statements that we asked people to respond to, and they were given the options between strongly disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly agree. So when it came to this particular statement, my weekly team meetings have a clear purpose and are a good use of my time. Only 22% of employees either agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. Let me give you a few other statements that were a little concerning to us. This next one is during team meetings, all voices on our team are heard and are given opportunities to be heard. And when asked to evaluate this statement, only 37% of employees across the organization agree or strongly agree with this statement. Let me give you another one. There's clear follow through on action items between team meetings. Only 43% of staff are saying that there's actually something that comes out of our weekly team meetings. So, in order to address this, what we need from each of our managers is to use an agenda template for your team meetings. We feel that this is going to be something that is going to help to keep structure and give some organization and help with follow through for our team meetings. And so the agenda looks like this. Let me walk you through each of these different items here. So let's focus on the part that says agenda item or topic. So basically, should be pretty straightforward. This is where you're going to write down any of the different topics you're going to be talking about during your team meeting. And then to the left of it is the amount of time that you'd allocate to each of these topics. So if you have a 60-minute weekly team meeting, you might not want, maybe you'll spend your entire time on one topic, but maybe you'll have some different topics. And this will just help to make sure that you don't run long and cheat some other things. So we have the time allocated to each of those topics. And then I also want to remind all of the managers that you shouldn't feel like you need to be the person responsible for all the different items in the agenda. And so there could be other people on your team that could be more appropriate for talking about certain agenda items that go into your team meeting. Beyond that, coming out, remember that we had that data point that people felt nothing was happening between our team meetings and there's no follow through. And so we want to try to address that with a specific area on our team meeting agenda that says, what action items or follow up is needed. And then also we want that accountability piece of by who and when. So there's our new team meeting agenda that we'd like all of the managers to use across the organization in order to start to tighten up our team meetings and maybe these are going to help the staff across the organization feel that our team meetings are a better use of their time. All right. That is the material that the organization has sent to us saying maybe this is something that either we should be using or you can work off of this lesson in order to create that 60-minute training. Now, let me ask you this. Before we start to design our own 60-minute lessons, let me ask you to react to what you just experienced here. So, Aaron's going to put up a poll that basically asks, what was this learning experience like? And there's several questions. There's 4 questions on this this survey. So go ahead and be honest. They're straightforward yes or no answers here, and once you have responded to those, we'll get some thoughts here. The questions are, was the purpose of that lesson clear? Did I give clear instructions for activities during that sample lesson? Did I maintain a safe learning environment that made you feel welcome and encouraged to participate? And did I give you a chance to participate? All right, we'll give you a few more moments to go ahead and finish putting in your thoughts, and then we'll take a look at the results of this poll. All right, there's some interesting results in here. So I'm going to go ahead and if you haven't done it, go ahead and push those last buttons. I'm going to end this poll here, and we're going to share some results, which I think are pretty interesting. So the first question, the purpose was pretty clear. Oh, great. Most people, the overwhelming majority of people felt that the purpose of that lesson that I just shared, that sample lesson, was pretty clear. It was about using an agenda for managers during team meetings. The second is where I start to see some interesting responses here. Brian gave clear, organized instructions for all activities in the sample lesson. So during that lesson, which maybe lasted 5-ish minutes, they're actually I hopefully now this question can this particular poll question could be interpreted in several different ways. I gave clear instructions, I think, in terms of how you might use that agenda. Now, one of the things that was missing from that presentation was any sort of activity for you all to do. And so, in that sense, there were no instructions for an activity, and so I would almost put NA. There's no instructions for any sort of activity because I didn't actually ask you to do anything. The third question here, Brian maintained a safe learning environment that made you feel welcome and encouraged you to participate. I love that a lot of people said yes, even though you didn't have a chance to participate. I love that you felt safe, or many people felt that way. And then that last question, this is also some interesting results. I gave you a chance to participate, and then I offered feedback as necessary and can tell if you could implement the new policy. And we have a mix. Actually, the majority of respondents said I did. Now, the fact is, during that sample, I didn't give an activity. I didn't have you fill out the agenda. I didn't have you create an agenda. And so, in that sense, that first question that I asked when you were introducing yourselves, your name, your hometown, and how can you tell if people get it? And sometimes we have an opportunity to be in person. We can see some of those light bulbs go off. When we're doing virtually, it's a little bit more difficult to tell if people get it unless we give people a challenge and have them actually do something to create an agenda, or maybe to even take a look at the agenda and ask some questions. I spent the entire time during that sample presentation just kind of talking at you. Now I can see some of the responses saying, I was thinking that we participated in answering the reflection question in the chat. Yes, and absolutely. So basically what I was asking you to rate was just that little piece that I was talking about, that sample agenda there. And so when it comes to telling whether or not people get it, whether or not people are able to do something, there are some very specific ways that we can do this. And I'm going to share that with you here because what I just shared with you, and I see why people were answering how they were answering in that poll, is that I just wanted you to kind of talk specifically about that 5-minute section that I was presenting as something that was given to us as a potential way to present this information. And so we need a lesson on running polls. Maybe I need a lesson on describing polls and the instructions in it a little bit better. But let me talk about this because what I did in that sample was I did a lot of talking. And sometimes we have to present information and that's okay. The problem comes when that's the only thing that we do is talking. And so let me just real quick share this four-step process. Again, this could be review for people who have been on these webinars. It could be new for if this is the first time that you've been with us for one of these webinars. But let me just talk about these steps real quick. And the first step, and this, the lesson that I shared with you, there can be an argument made that there was an anchor, some sort of attempt to do an anchor. The anchor, and this is when I a lot of times when I take a look at people's lesson plans that they ask me to review, this is one of the things that's missing. And that first step, the anchor activity, is how do we dip our toes into the content without overwhelming people so that they can kind of see themselves in the content. If it's new, if it's brand new, if they're not familiar with it at all, how do they connect to the content so they're ready to absorb and learn the content? Because what I did was a lot of talking. I didn't ask. If you had ever used a meeting agenda before, and or show of hands, how many of you agree with some of these statements or some of the data that's being put up here? I didn't ask for any of that. I just started tossing information at you, which is the second step, and that's content. But the first thing we need to do is set the stage. And in that cookbook, that training activity cookbook that we gave you to download, there's a lot of different ways to do this. And it doesn't have to take a lot of time. So we can ask for a show of hands. We can ask a question, something like, how many of you have ever used an agenda? Or how many of you have attended a really, really, what you felt was a really productive team meeting? What was it that made it so productive? Okay, let's talk about what we want to do at the organization to make our team meeting more productive. And that's when we can start to get into the content. So the first thing we need to do is dip our toes in the waters of the content. Let's warm our learners up. Let's prime that pump, and then let's get into the content. And basically, what I shared with you, Courtney even says, "Yeah, I zoned out a little because the agenda itself seems so explanatory." Yes, absolutely. That's the problem with just giving information is that sometimes if I was in person and Courtney was one of those participants in person, she might even be making eye contact with me. It doesn't mean she's not zoning out. So let's prime our pump with our learners. Let's give them the content. And before we move on to the next topic or before we end the session, we do need to do some other things. And this next piece is application. So whether or not you were listening, whether or not you took a look at the agenda and felt it was self-explanatory, now I need to see if you can use it. Can you put together an agenda, for example? And so I might do an activity where I say, all right, why don't you work with a person next to you, or why don't you just work on your own and fill this out? What would this look like? And this will give me an opportunity to see if what you have in your mind about what I presented is the same thing that I have in my mind. And this is where we have an opportunity to see if our learners are actually getting it. And then finally, future use. A future use step is recognizing that people aren't going to have memorized every single thing that we talk about during a training session. They won't have memorized every single thing that they do, even if we get them actively involved. So future use is what can we give to our learners so that they can remember what they learned when they need to remember it. And this could be an activity where we have people actually create an agenda for their next team meeting. Or maybe we give them a checklist that says, these are things to keep in mind as you're creating your agenda. Whatever it might be, but future use is a way to remind our participants or a resource or a job aid or something else that's going to help people when they are out in the real world to use the content that we're learning. And again, this is a handout that kind of defines each of these steps. And it was something that Rachel put into the chat if you wanted to kind of take a look at that. So, what I would love to do now is to see if you get it, to see if you understand these steps. So I'm going to give you an application activity now, and that is going to be using that shared Google document file. What I'm going to ask you to do is to use the objectives that are given. So there's two objectives that are in that document. If you go down to the second page, there's a lesson plan template that's there. And there are two objectives that we want you to create a lesson plan to not just present information, but also see if the learners get it. And these objectives here, the first one is identify the major impacts on the team when employees don't feel their team meetings are a good use of their time. When I gave you that sample, I didn't do any of that, right? I didn't talk about, well, why would we even use this? What's the impact on the team when people don't feel meetings are a good use of our time? So that's the first thing that we want people to be able to do, and to get into with the training lesson plan we're going to ask you to design. And then the second is by the end of the session, learners should be able to create an agenda for an upcoming team meeting. Okay, so there's two objectives for this lesson. You have a lesson plan template on that second page. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to take those learning objectives and to start to fill out this lesson plan with key points, with activities. What would you do in order to introduce these concepts? What would you do to meet these learning objectives? What would you do to see if your learners are getting it? So, in just a moment, Aaron is going to set up some breakout rooms, and we're going to put about 5 or 6 people in each breakout room. And if you take a look again at the shared document over on the left-hand side, you'll see a bunch of tabs. And what we're going to ask you to do is to work in a very specific tab. So, if you are in breakout room 3, for example, you would go to the tab that says Breakout Group 3 and you would work in that particular tab. If you go to any other tab, you're going to see typing happening, because other groups are working in there, right? So just go to the tab that you're going to work in. And the reason that we are doing this shared document is because the next thing we're going to do is have somebody else review your lesson plan, but we'll get to that down the road here a little bit. All right, so Aaron, do you want to set up some breakout rooms? And if you can't get into the breakout room for whatever reason, if you're joining on your phone or if you're joining off the web-based kind of application as opposed to your desktop and can't get into the breakout rooms for whatever reason, don't panic. I will run a conversation in a group doing the lesson planning here in the general meeting room once people have gone into their own rooms. Aaron, do you want to go ahead and set up those breakout rooms?
The breakout rooms are open.
Excellent. We'll see. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't give them amount of time. Let's take about 20 minutes to work on this and create a 60-minute lesson in your breakout groups.
I'll broadcast that, Brian, so everyone gets that info.
Yep. And we'll give folks another few minutes just to get into their rooms. I'm going to stop sharing um, the PowerPoint, and I'm going to start sharing the shared document that we can work on in this room. Let me pull up the handout here. Bring it over here. Set up my screen. We are the general meeting room. And let's take a look. Take a look and see which participants are still here. All right. We have a handful of participants who are still here. Thank you for staying here with me. And we're going to jump into just starting to create this lesson. We want an anchor, a content application, future use activities. And so how do we do that and meet the needs of these learning objectives. And so, one way that we're going to be able to do this is either you can type in your thoughts if you'd like to do that, but you can also raise your hand. And what we can do is try to take you off of mute so that you're able to kind of share some thoughts or ideas. But how might we start with this lesson and create something that's going to be 60 minutes that addresses some of these learning objectives? I'm open to anybody who wants to raise their hand. I'll take you off of mute. And Shay, thank you for. Oh, where are you, Shay? Shay Smith raised hand. But I don't see your name. Oh, there it is. I see. It jumps to the top. We'll take you off of.
Can you hear me?
There we go. Yes.
Awesome. Yay. So one of the things that I did quickly want to ask, should we create this based on the training being virtual or in person, or is that relevant?
Good question. Why don't we do in person? Just to, that's a good question, just to kind of level set there. And
Okay.
since I have you off of mute, do you have any thoughts?
I
Do you want to
do.
jump
I
in? All right.
do.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So I think it would be a good opportunity to kind of have a parking lot where participants name a word to describe how they've maybe felt in the past when a meeting didn't feel helpful.
Yeah, and you were obviously paying attention when I was talking about anchor activities because I think that is a great way to set the stage and just asking that question. Um, and so uh, we'll well, let's keep that there. We can refine that. We can make it a little bit more detailed. I'm just kind of curious if other folks have other thoughts in terms of, okay, that's how we can start. Then where do we go when it comes? And that really does talk to that first objective. What else would might we do? And so I see Kimberly go for it.
All right, I think I'm unmuted. Am I?
Yes,
All right.
yes.
Hi. I was just thinking that since this is geared toward the managers, before presenting them with any facts about why, like ask them what, how they think their team meetings are going to get their perspective, which just thinking it's probably different than what the results of the survey would show. And that way that would lead you into why we're here today.
Yeah, love it. So we have a couple of options. Maybe we ask both of those questions. Maybe we leave it to one of those questions. But either way, that kind of sets the stage for making this less kind of this is what you have to do this because we say so, and more about, okay, well, let's hear. How are your team meetings going? How do you know that they're going well? Have you ever been in a team meeting that didn't feel very helpful? What did that feel like? What did that look like? What made it so that it wasn't helpful? What made you feel it wasn't helpful? Kimberly, is your hand up again?
It is not. I
Okay.
thought that it would automatically lower, but it did not.
Perfect. It's like when I'm in person, I'm looking for people to respond, and somebody wipes their nose or sneezes, and it's like an auction. Like if I sense motion, then I immediately turn attention to them. All right. So we have some thoughts here in terms of how to set the stage, how to start it. Does anybody have any thoughts in terms of how we might present some content here? What information might we give to the managers that would make this feel like it was like they're learning something here? Kenneth. Let's do it. Let's hear what you have to say.
Yeah, hey there. I guess I would say like you said, so they feel like the meeting is, they're getting something out of it. If they could have the topics be prearranged, so maybe before your meeting or your scheduled meeting. Like for me, where I work, I have to have a quarterly meeting, so I know the date. So maybe prior to that, can I kind of set the table early with topics that they might find valuable? Sometimes you don't have a choice. I'm in regulation, so sometimes I have to talk about a specific regulation. So that's the content, but maybe something they might get some value out of it. But whether it's clarifying a policy or a change in something and so on. What do they want to? What do they want to? How can they learn? What can they get out of it versus Charlie Brown's parents talking on the phone for an hour? Blah 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 blah. you know.
Yeah. So hopefully I'm starting to capture some of the things that you shared just in terms of here's some expectations. One is having people just think about what topics for their own meeting might be
Mhm.
valuable. And the other is the expectation that agendas should be set in advance. So if it's weekly, then it's whatever in advance of the weekly meeting. If it's quarterly, obviously you have some time between those meetings to set those agendas. Excellent. All right, we're building something here. What other information might we need to give people in terms of content, right? So that second step, the setting expectations could be part of the content. It could start to bleed into application where people are starting to brainstorm what they might do to fill in an agenda. But what kind of content might we need to give to our learners, or what content has this organization given us to work with in order to share? We have, all right, Kenneth, your hand is back up. Feel free to unmute yourself and you can go ahead and,
Yeah.
um, yeah,
Well, I think like you said, kind of like you set the table early, and then it starts to bleed into like what content. So I would say like if you have a topic, if you have some examples or even like a survey question, like have you guys noticed this during your audits? I'm an auditor. So like during your audit engagements, have you seen this? Like kind of like and then if not, or like what examples do you have for a certain topic you want to talk about? Like I don't know if it's labeling work papers and it's not that's something not done consistently. You say like, all right, here's what we're going to talk about, and here are some examples as to maybe why not, or and then here's why. You can't really say we generally don't say you don't do something without giving them a corrective action or something to replace the behavior, if that makes any sense. So, but yeah, something like you said, it bleeds in from the agenda into it. So like examples and or situations maybe.
yeah. So I love that because we have some data to work with. And what we can do is we can ask people to share. All right, so here's the data from across the organization. Do you have some examples, or can you even brainstorm examples for how you think that that this actually looks like in real life when people say that their meetings are not a good use of their time? Has anybody, and it goes back to one of these questions, has anybody ever felt one of those in their meetings? Have you attended a meeting that hasn't been a good use of time? What are some reasons that some of our learners might feel, or not learners, what are some reasons that some of our employees might feel these aren't a good use of time? So we can start to get into the data, and that gets us a little bit of the content as well as making that content personal. How about so we have the data to share, but we also have this agenda that we need to introduce to people. Any thoughts in terms of okay, so and it seems like we're getting really into identify the major impacts on the team when employees don't feel a team meeting is a good use of their time. So I think we've gotten that a little bit. The second objective here is to create an agenda for an upcoming team meeting. And does anybody have any thoughts in terms of do we need to have another anchor activity, or do we feel like these activities are good? And or Any thoughts in terms of how we introduce this new agenda to our managers? I'm gonna actually click allow to talk for everybody who's in this right now, so you can take yourself off of mute without needing to raise your hand and share your thoughts here. Yeah, Ileana, or I'm sorry, Liliana.
Hello, sorry. I'm multitasking as most managers do, and I just popped in. Um, so I do apologize. I'm rather late coming in.
Oh, you're just popping in, which is totally fine. Thank you for that. You can go ahead and throw yourself back on mute. So with the rest of the group, one of the things I would love to hear is any other thoughts in terms of how do we present this new agenda? How do we educate people about that? And then how do we actually see if they're going to use it? See if they can use it.
I think first, position it as the solution for some of the results that we may get from those initial setting the stage questions, and then have them work collaboratively to fill out one. So kind of give them a test case for using the agenda.
I think those are two different things here. So, using the agenda, give the whole group um, uh, a scenario and have them create an agenda for it. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and maybe pairs or smaller groups, but yeah, have them work to fill in an agenda to actually see if they can use it.
Okay. So if we have them create it in pairs, then what happens when they're done in their pair work? So Shay, I don't know if you have some thoughts. I also saw that Twana took yourself off of mute, and so if you wanted to also share some thoughts, feel free to jump in here.
Hi, Brian. I
Hello.
was just thinking, we start telling the story of how we got here from the results of the employee viewpoint survey, and like going into an exploration phase of, you know, how we can address the agenda to change it to better suit our meetings, and we coming up with a solution to that.
Yeah. And so that could even be in, kind of positioning the agenda as a
Mhm.
solution, asking managers to share their own thoughts on how this agenda could be helpful, useful to giving structure and purpose to team meetings. Love it.
Yeah. Like, who is our direct report from the meeting? what the information that we're gathering at the meeting, where is it going? How are we using it? That might better help the help put together the agenda.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. Great. So we have an agenda that's starting to take shape here, where we're setting the stage. We're asking managers about how their team meetings are going. How do they even know if their team meetings are actually effective? Maybe asking managers to share how they've felt when they've been in a meeting that wasn't helpful. We're diving into the data a little bit and then asking people to brainstorm some examples of ways that they've seen this data actually in real life. Setting some expectations, asking participants to think about what topics could go into the agenda. I'm gonna move this down a little bit because I think that it is something that would come after we introduce the agenda. So let me move that a little bit. And then having people use it in a sample sense, working in pairs, just coming up. And what that does is for folks that maybe didn't understand how we presented it, it gives people an opportunity to work together and kind of explain it to each other. And then the final thing that we haven't talked about here is future use. What would we give participants in order to remember this particular session? Can we give them anything that would help them and kind of give them a push as they go forth into the real world? Shay is saying a copy of the agenda and a specific call to action. So definitely, so uh, wrap up call to action. Provide the electronic file of the agenda for everybody to be able to use. Um, and so you're mentioning a call to action, Shay, a specific call to action. If you have any thoughts on what that specific call to action might be, I'd love to hear it. Shannon saying resources and references from the lessons. So share uh, any data or resources that could be helpful as a reminder. And then if I was to do this, one call to action I might have is to create your first team meeting agenda. And submit to me to review by the end of the week, just so I can see everybody's doing it. So there we go. We have a lesson. I see that Aaron has said we're going to close um, our breakout rooms very shortly. So thank you all for
Do
helping
that
me to
now.
to kind of navigate that. And as Aaron looks to bring the large group back, are we back, Aaron?
I'm bringing everyone back.
All
They should
right.
all be joining shortly. All rooms are closed.
Excellent. Well, welcome back. Hopefully that was helpful to be able to work with a small group, just to kind of talk through what it looks like to actually create a lesson plan. Now, and I know that for my particular group, we walked through kind of some different steps to introduce. Oop, I was
Sorry,
muted.
Brian. I was trying to move it so we could see you, and I muted you.
Excellent.
My,
Well,
my
here I
fault.
am. Um, So I know in our group we started to kind of walk through the process of creating a lesson plan using those steps, anchor, content, application, feature use. We may have cheated a little bit because the person who was facilitating the conversation in our group already knows all about the anchor, content, application, feature use. So I'm kind of curious what other people were able to come up with. And unfortunately, with this size group, we're not going to be able to report out what it is that you came up with. But what we're going to do is we're going to have a chance to take a look at some of the at least one other lesson that another group did, just to get a feel for what this looked like as you were going through this process. And so, what I'm going to do is um, at the very bottom of that shared document. So if you go past that lesson plan, there's one last page. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to use that page to review another group. And so the way we're going to do this, and this is going to be really, really important that people are kind of paying attention to what I'm going to ask you to do here. What I'm going to ask you to do is if you were in group three, you're going to add one number. So you're going to take a look at group four's lesson plan. If you're in group eight, you're going to look at group nine's lesson plan. Aaron, how many groups did we have?
We had 10 groups.
If you were in group 10, what you will do is you will look at the general meeting room lesson. And then the general meeting room will take a look at group number ones. So basically, you're just going to add a number to your own group, and that's how you're going to figure out who's you're going to review. And so, what I want you to do is to use that final page in that group's shared document. So, you'll use that final page. So, if you're looking at group four, you'll look at their lesson plan, and then you'll go down to that bottom part, and you'll fill out a checklist of did you see an anchor? Did you see content? Did you see application? Did you see for use? And if you like what you saw, go ahead and put some comments in there. If you have some thoughts in terms of how you might want to refine it, go ahead and put those comments in there as well. So we'll be kind of jumping back into our breakout rooms, the same breakout rooms we were. You're going to look at the group that's one higher than yours, unless you're group 10, and then you're going to go down to the general meeting room. And we'll have about 10 minutes to explore another group's lesson plan. So let's go back into our rooms and we'll take a look at another group's lesson plan. All right. We should be back with my general room. Let me bring back that uh, document that I was looking at, which is this, but we need to take a look at the tabs here. We're going to be looking at group number one. So let's take a look at group number one's lesson. And basically, let's take a look at this lesson. And then what we're going to do is we're going to scroll down to this checklist, and we're going to see if there's an anchor, if there's if there's content, if there are application activities, and if there's a future use activity. So let's take a look at their lesson as I look through it. And this is always kind of tricky to do with somebody else's work, but we'll take a look. So the first thing they have here is introduce a case study describing a meeting based on the survey results. So come up with a fictional meeting that's based on some of the survey results. And then they would have us consider our reaction to the case study. How would we develop a clear purpose, make people feel heard, develop a communication loop or follow through on action items? And so they would do this. This is part of their lesson even before they give us some of the survey results. And I think that's a pretty interesting way just to kick this off. And then they give us the survey results. And then they talk about effective agenda building. Use post-its to suggest topics for the next meeting. So here they would probably be introducing the agenda as well. And then they would use sticky notes to suggest topics for the next meeting. It could be done anonymously, and have a topic brainstorm. So do a reduction activity to reduce the topics down to what would be on the next agenda. Some will go on the back burner or the parking lot so people don't feel their ideas are thrown out. And then they have provide contact information for follow-up or provide resources for continued learning after the class. So that is the lesson, the sequence and flow. And again, it's tough to kind of put something together in 20 minutes, but that seems pretty complete. I would love to hear, and you can put it in the chat, or you can, again, take yourself off of mute in order to just kind of share. Let's take a look at the first thing. There's an anchor activity that appropriately grabs the learner's attention. So maybe just in chat, give me a yes or no. Do you feel like this lesson plan has an anchor activity that grabs the learner's attention? I would love to see your thoughts here. I see some thumbs up. I see a few yeses. Shay says, I don't. Shay, do you want to share if you feel like you can come off of mute? I'd love just to hear what you're seeing and what you would have liked to have seen. Oh, you can't unmute. All right. To me, it looks like they got right down to business, Twana says. So, and I'm taking a look at this, and I see that kind of the right down to business piece that I'm seeing is they're sharing the results of the survey, and then they're building an agenda. And so what they not being part of their group. What I see them attempting to do is to introduce a case study, and then consider the reaction. Now that's really interesting in terms of it looks like they're getting right down to business because they're going right into an activity. There's no introduction in terms of, hi, thank you for coming. We're doing a session about this. So that's really interesting. I'm gonna put a few things down here in the feedback based on this. So I think there is, that case study is an attempt to do an anchor activity. And I think that what Tawana and Shay are saying here is super valid, was that um, uh, given the current lesson plan, it appears that this program would jump right into business without any sort of introduction. Um, Going into the case study, it could be helpful to set the stage a bit about why we're here. Um, all right, so we're taking a look at that first one. Then, do they get into the content? How do you feel about that? Do you see them actually presenting some content in this lesson that gives us kind of the meat of what we're here to learn? And then again, you can give me a thumbs up, you can give me a yes in the chat, you can give me a no. Would love to see that. I'm seeing yes, no. I'm seeing a little bit of both. Now, and again, I'm gonna take this with a grain of salt because the group only had 20 minutes to put this together, and they're working in a group. What I see here is they're sharing results from the staff survey. The thing I don't see is an introduction to the agenda. So again, I think that yes, we see the survey results, which give this a why we need to start using an agenda, but we're not seeing an actual introduction to the agenda. All right, the next question here is there's an application activity. Um, tied to the first learning objective. So the first learning objective is to identify some of the major impacts on the team when employees don't feel team meetings are a good use of time. Do you see anything in here where we're talking about that? So we have a case study that describes some of the survey results. I'm going to say yes. It seems the case study is offering some insights or steering us toward insights on uh, impact when meetings are not meaningful. Then there's another question. Is there an application activity tied directly to the second learning objective that will assess whether or not they get it? And that objective is to create an agenda for an upcoming meeting. So here we have the activity around effective agenda building, where they're brainstorming something for their next team meeting, and then kind of prioritizing some of those activities. And Aaron saying 2 minutes until we close this. So there is a little bit of this attempt at getting people to build an agenda. So there is an agenda building exercise, and it also is an exercise in prioritization, which is an interesting kind of thought that you don't have to cover every single thing in a team meeting. And then, is there a resource or activity connected with future use? And here we have provide contact information for follow-up or provide resources. So this is something where there is information about contact info or resources. Um, Probably need a little more time to build this lesson plan out more completely. All right. Yeah, I think that Diane has a comment in the chat here, and I think that lots of people, 20 minutes is not a ton of time to create a lesson plan, but it's an opportunity just to kind of feel what that process looks like or feels like. And it also is a good reminder that putting something together that has an intentional design, especially using Anchor content application features, takes a little time. It takes some thought to put it together, but once it is put together, boy, is there an opportunity to see what other people are able to actually do all together. All right. Well, thank you for going through this little assessment activity with us. And so we're gonna wait for a moment or two until. Oh, is everybody joining us, Aaron?
Everyone's rejoining us. Yep.
Excellent. All right. Well. Let's pull this back here, and I have a few questions as we start to wrap this up. One is I'm curious if you can share. So one of the things that I noticed, and Diane put this comment into the chat. My group didn't have time to get to the part of the training that brings in the agenda template and an exercise creating one for a future meeting. Totally fair. 20 minutes is not a ton of time to be able to build out a complete lesson. But one of the things that I hope that people are taking away from today's session is that when we're putting together a lesson and we actually really want to be intentional about seeing whether or not our learners get it, it's going to take some time. It's going to take some time and some thought to start to build some stuff out. That said, what we were able to do in 20 minutes is sketch out a broad outline. I think a lot of these lessons had a broad outline that may not have been detailed in terms of what the activity is or what's going to happen in the activity, but there is some thought in terms of if I had to put together a broad map, a general overview of what this looks like, this is the sequence and flow of activities I would use. And this, once I flesh this out a little bit, would really help me to not just present the content in an intentional way, but help our learners to connect to that content through an anchor. And it would help me see if they get it through that application activity. So I'm kind of curious. One of the things I mentioned it earlier on, one of the things that I see missing a lot of times in lessons is an anchor activity. And so I'd love to hear if anybody had seen either in your group when you're creating something, or when you're taking a look at another group's lesson, to kind of evaluate, do they have each of these components? I'd love to hear any examples of clever uses of anchor activities. And you can feel free to go ahead and drop an observation into the chat, or you go ahead and raise your hand and we can take you off of mute. When I was taking a look at Group One's lesson, I loved how they brought in the idea of a case study based on the data that was already given as the anchor activity. So welcoming people in, kind of giving people this thought of, hey, we're not just going to talk about an agenda, but let's take a look at what the impact could be on a case that's based on some real data. Looks like Deborah has your hand up. So I'm going to allow you to talk. So feel free to take yourself off of mute and share what it is that you saw.
We use common ground questions. How many of you have experienced a wonderful meeting? How many of you have experienced a terrible meeting that was a waste of your time? And then we're going to use that to segue into what a good meeting requires,
Yeah.
because we'll have identified, because they would then brainstorm in two small groups what a good meeting requires, and then compare it to the table.
Yes, I love that. And I love how you phrase that as a common ground question, because that's one of the things that we're looking for in a training session, is because we know people come from all different walks of life, all different experiences. And so where can we find common ground? How many people have ever attended a really effective training, or a really effective team meeting? What were some characteristics of it? How many people have ever attended one that just seemed to be a waste of time? What made it that it was a waste of time? All right, so let's talk about some of the stuff that's good, some of the stuff that's not so good. Let's talk about how we bring in this good stuff every single time we have a meeting. Let's talk about how we avoid some of these things that aren't good every single time. Thank you, Deborah. That's a great example. I see some other examples. I love that people are using some of the things in the cookbook. Clarissa says we use the messy start or specific icebreakers that connect to the topic in some way. I love some of these comments. I do have another question here that I'd love to hear. Keep those coming in terms of anything else that you saw that was a novel way to start something. I'm also kind of curious if anybody was able to, either in your group when you were creating something, or when you were taking a look at another group's lesson, when you were doing kind of the review, the peer review. What were some unique application activities, or what were some application activities that you saw, or maybe that you discussed in your own group that you yourself were thinking, huh, I never really thought of a way to do that in order to see if people are getting it. Feel free to put your thoughts in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand and we'll take you off of mute so you can share. And as people are typing in some things into the chat, we had them evaluate or judge some meeting agendas in small groups so they could actually kind of take a look at some agendas actually in action. So go beyond what was your best experience. But if you were to see an agenda like this, would it be, what's good about it? What's not so good about it? I love that. We were talking about having the managers create the agenda template. This gives them buy-in and they will be more apt to use it. So create your own agenda using this template while we're here in this practice environment. Also a fantastic way to do it. So basically, if nothing else, if you take nothing else away from the past 68 minutes that we've been together. Really, what we really want to kind of instill when we talk about let's cook, let's create a lesson plan, let's create something that's engaging. Going back to that first question that I asked as you were introducing yourselves, what are some ways that you can tell if your learners are getting it? And using these four steps, the anchor, the content, the application, and the future use, these steps it gives you some structure, they're easy to remember, and it helps you to avoid lecture heavy programming. And so you will have access to these lesson plans that you kind of worked on as a group, and you can kind of see some of the peer feedback if you scroll down to the bottom of the page that you worked on. You'll have access to that, so that will give you some thoughts and some ideas. But if you take nothing else away from this session, please make sure that that handout that talks about these four steps is somewhere handy for you next time you're thinking of creating your own lesson plan. I'm gonna turn it back over to actually not quite yet. I have a few other announcements that I want to go through and just some reminders. Aaron mentioned some of these things at the very beginning, but next month we're going to be talking about engaging your most challenging participants. So when it comes to training, we love to have a room full of people who are super engaged and ready to participate. But unfortunately, reality says that we will generally have somebody who will challenge us as presenters, as facilitators. And so, how do we engage them? And there's lots of different challenging participants out there. It could be the person who dominates the conversation, it could be the person who doesn't engage, it could be the person who's having side conversations, the person who's on their phone, the person who always has to be right. Doesn't matter what you say, their way is actually the right way, right? So, how do we engage these participants? If you'd like to join us next month, the QR code is there. There's a link at the bottom, and I think that Rachel will put that link back into the chat if you'd like to sign up for that as well. Just a reminder, if we'd love for you to connect with us on LinkedIn, and so please do feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. Share with us how training is going. Are you using some of the stuff that you're learning from these webinars? If you are like, you know what, I get these concepts, but this isn't necessarily my strong suit. We do have a tool called Soapbox, which can actually you put in a few items of information about the presentation you have coming up, and then it will use AI to generate both a sequence and flow that goes anchor, content, application, future use, as well as some content that it will fill in for you. That said, we have some giveaways. Here's some books that I've written, but we'd love to give one of these away. And so Aaron, do you have the name of somebody who will be winning one of these books?
I do, and I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording and then we'll do our giveaways.